Hello and welcome, my name is Trismegistus and this is a bonus video where I'm going to speculate a bit more about the images we saw in the most recent Friday Facts. That Friday Facts was number 417, Space Age Development. Right then, so the first one of course is this platform here. I don't think there's a lot to speculate about on this. They clearly used landfill as the, placeholder for the the space platforms. What is particularly interesting is the use of lasers. They have stated in quite a few of the Friday Facts when platforms have been mentioned that lasers are actually not a kind of good solution for the platforms, and really it's about gun turrets. Assuming that this is the same one, I don't think it is. I think it might be a different platform. But if it was the same platform, this does also have gun turrets on it as well as lasers. I mean, I'm wondering if maybe lasers are worth just having a couple of. But as I say, this looks like a different platform, I think, and that maybe this had been built after the switch to ammo was like a better way of doing things. And clearly they just decided, I'm guessing there's an element to this of kind of just saying, well, lasers are always the solution. So, I mean, they're not actually. Flamers obviously are on a planet, but, lasers are like, just a thing that gets spammed on everywhere. Let's give gun turrets more of a thing to do, maybe. And also, as I've speculated quite a lot before, perhaps there'll be other weapons that work quite well on platforms as well. I say it looks like they moved away from having lasers. I can kind of really understand that. Making it so that platforms have like a power issue is quite an interesting way of approaching things, because you've obviously got the thing that, they're in space, so there's never going to be night time on space, or you would assume not. I mean, they could obviously go into the shadow of a planet or what have you, but I don't think they'll go that far. And so having ways of generating power that, are space efficient and what have you is quite an interesting challenge to introduce, I think. But yeah, it's interesting that effectively what you're therefore talking about is introducing a constraint in order to make the game more fun, basically, so that you've got something to work against, to butt up against in order to solve a challenge. And it looks like they were trying to introduce that with these PCEs, or what they actually call space platform ejectors. And I think that's what these are. If we zoom in a bit, we can see that it's all sort of Vulcanus based. You know what's going on here? So we've got these PCEs, and we've got the orange science pack, we've got the placeholder for tungsten carbide, we've got the placeholder for some sort of tungsten products, tungsten beams. We've got the big mining drill here. We've also got cliff explosives. So I don't know if that means that Vulcanus is where we're unlocking cliff explosives. I hadn't understood it to be that, but maybe it is, and that therefore they're exporting them from Vulcanus here. I mean, obviously that could have changed. One of the things you have to bear in mind with this video is that this is obviously all the early stuff, or stuff that's been reworked. So a lot of what I'm going to say is just thoughts and ideas based on it, and is almost certainly not true because it's almost certainly changed. But yes, this is obviously a platform that is exporting stuff from Vulcanus, and each of these appears to have like a separate contents to it, and instead of a single unified storage, it was like having storage chests on the platform. And they did mention when they introduced platforms that you can't put storage chests on them, and clearly this is all part of the same thing. So what's interesting about that I was kind of getting to before I got distracted, was that was clearly intended as a restriction, that these PCEs, these exporter things, would have a would only be able to do certain things. You would have to set the recipe, which is, I'm guessing, where it got tedious, because you were having to set the contents, basically, to say, right, put 500 big mining drills in here and 1,000 of the tungsten carbide or what have you. So that as a restriction clearly proved tedious and annoying, but the power one is clearly sufficiently interesting and of a challenge to solve compared to that other mechanic. And it's just interesting to see that that's the type of tweak that goes on when you're iterating through these different versions. We do also see we've got the, the old asteroid models that they're talking about, so that's them floating about. It doesn't look like there's any special one, as it were, so there's no one we haven't seen before in a sense. These are obviously coloured differently, but, they're smelting, I guess, or it looks like the... I wonder if... in fact, I think that's probably... I assume that was literally smelting, the asteroid chunks, but I think these are more placeholder for crushers, and that crushers were a separate function then, whereas... Oh no, they're a separate function now, aren't they? I thought for a moment that the grabbers did the crushing as well, but the grabbers grab it, then crushers crush it, and then there would have to be a separate smelting thing. So it looks like maybe these were used as the placeholder for doing that, because they're actually yellow. I don't know if you can see that, but yeah, so interesting that was a separate function for a very long time, crush the stuff. But yeah, I think it's just, carbon asteroids, your metal asteroids, and your organic, asteroids, basically. Not organic, water asteroids, essentially. So I think that's all just kind of as we've seen before, except using, as I say, a separate modified placeholder foundry as the crusher. And yeah, obviously these are... If you've ever heard the term grey box, that's exactly what these are. They're just literally boxes that developers put into the game as effectively just a placeholder, like a super early placeholder, just to have something that represents the scale of it, the scale and size and location of it. And just the flame coming out is quite funny. But it looks like the recipes for making the fuel and stuff have been in for a very long time. Because, as I say, these are very early images from the game. And it's got this whole oxidizer and fuel thing going on, even in these early images. And that's what it looks like these chemical foundries are doing, making the oxidizer and fuel and all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting that was just that was obviously a very early introduction to space platforms, that concept, and that's still there. I'm using the term interesting, meaning interesting to me. You may not find them interesting. Right then, so this one is the early Vulcanus. Obviously, the actual Vulcanus surface, as it were, was just very much work in progress. And we see the work in progress rails, elevated rails and the supports to them. I don't think this kind of shows us a great deal, other than they were clearly thinking of all the planets as just more mining in normal ways of doing normal stuff. I think this is, I don't know why it's doing that, that path, but I think this is a belt of tungsten. So it looks like tungsten was in the game quite early as well. But yeah, this is just a fairly bog standard pickup location of what is presumably some raw material coming through. And it's just going onto a rail system. So there's nothing other than it looking a bit different, being reskinned. There isn't really anything going on here, that's new or different. You've got lava knocking about, but, in a sense, so what, So yeah, I can fully understand the point that just having more planets doing more of the usual stuff was not really justifying having the expansion. The same is basically true here. This is the early Fulgora image, and it's pretty much the same. It's copper ore going into foundries, going in onto a belt, going onto a train, and off she goes. It's just that you're using, elevated rails, and in a sense, so what? Obviously, they're super cool, but it's just rails. There's nothing mechanically massively different, other than the elevated nature of them and being able to, pass them over the top of each other, which is awesome, but it feels more like a mod than an entirely new planet that's justified. This is clearly the very early version of the Gleba terrain. I'm assuming that the sort of lighter colour is meant to be the, oil sand. It does look like it's just effectively like differently coloured water. It's not got a watery, shimmery effect, so I don't know if it's animated in the same way. But if you look, you could imagine this being filled with water, and that's what the terrain is essentially, and therefore maybe the concept of quicksand type oil sand that clogs you down, eats all your buildings, all of that sort of stuff, wasn't really in the game, because you wouldn't normally be able to access water at all. You wouldn't just, you wouldn't be able to walk on it, you wouldn't be able to build on it, and it looks like maybe that was an introduction as well as the fundamental thing. What is interesting, if this is, really is the early Fulgora gameplay, is that these are the lightning rods, and this is, a stack of accumulators being charged by lightning rods. So clearly lightning rods were in, and the idea of it being a lightning planet were in very early. And that would tie up with the whole name. The name is, the god of lightning and what have you. So clearly that was the concept from the very beginning. And the issue was more that when you turned up, all you were doing was you were just mining more material. You were just mining more copper, mining more... Is this stone? It looks like a weird colour, but mining more stuff, in the usual way. And I can fully understand the whole, right, well, that's not very interesting. Why have an entire planet, new planet, to do what I can already do on Nalvis as is? And of course, that's a fundamental thing for wanting the game to be interesting. But of course, if you're a prospective buyer for this product, if all it's doing is giving you more of the exact same thing, exact same process, but it's a different thing you get out of it, isn't that Bob's? Isn't that Angels? Isn't that K2? Isn't that SpaceX? How is this being differentiated from the mods, the overhaul mods? If it's not really introducing new mechanics, it's just introducing new places to do the old mechanics. So that's kind of what I think the issue was here. Right then, Gleba. So there's a lot more going on here because this appears to have been quite radically changed. The first thing, and I did discuss this in the video yesterday, is we have these things here. These lads here. These, as I said yesterday, appear to be basically the landing pads that they're talking about. I think they've got red and green connections for logistics. I think that's what those are. But essentially, the difference was that this was a single-use or single thing for a single product. So you could order down, as it's got here, roboports, the various green belts, level 3 speed modules, beacons, what else we got? Blue belts and glyph explosives, more blue belt stuff and lasers and what have you. So all that's really going on here is that these are effectively like single item, like requesting combined chests effectively. And I think the idea of this like circle in the top here is that that's effectively the the opening for a drop pod to come in, and that opens like that. The other option is it is like a roboport and they just hadn't implemented that functionality where it comes in and that's where bots can come in. I don't think it was necessarily, they could have done that, but I don't think that was, I think it's for some kind of capsule to come in, because that's why they've got all of this other gubbins, with roboports, because they could render roboports redundant if they had robot functionality. I'm assuming the pipes are just like cool pipes, basically. I don't think it means it's doing anything special with fluids, although it does beg the question of how fluids would come in. So I don't know if maybe the idea was that every planet had its own fluids and own oil and stuff like that, maybe. Oh, actually, I can see a barrel there. There's one barrel, it looks like, of light oil, maybe? I think. This change makes sense to me. It's another one where they're introducing a restriction, having one building that can do logistics, in order to make the game more fun. Because I think the big things with these is, if you're bringing in all of your lasers and what have you, just sticking these all around your base next to your walls is cheating in a sense. You're not having to take them anywhere, because the platform can just miraculously deliver them to any part of your base. Over the side here, we do have laser turrets, look. So there is clearly some sort of threat even at this stage on Gleba. Obviously, you would expect, in this version that it's really about, they were just sticking biters on to give a simulation of a threat rather than the actual enemy that's on here. This bright green stuff also looks like maybe it was, a separate biome, and, that's how they were representing it. It doesn't look like the concept we've got of the, fertile land being placed down, because it doesn't look like the landfill. So I think this is maybe just a differently brightly coloured green to suggest other terrain and biome types. and that maybe the whole landfill concept has come along later and is a sort of a different edition. I think this one is the landing pad rather than a different building. It just looks very similar to that. A lot of it is what you'd expect, undergrounds and beacons and nuclear fuel, interestingly, hints of here. Some sort of black stone there is interesting. We've even got like machine guns and rocket launchers in the chests. It does look like bits of asteroid are being moved around. I mentioned these before. I'm not convinced that these are asteroids. It's like the one that looks like almost like it's got two eyes on it. I think that is something else. It could be asteroids, but I say it didn't seem to match up with the graphics we saw in the asteroid one. There's also something in here that doesn't look like, to me, any of the buildings we've seen. Obviously, it is almost, well, it's pretty much guaranteed to be a placeholder. But a placeholder of what? It looks a bit like the Foundry, maybe? Maybe that's what the Foundry just used to look like? Or possibly the oil, maybe the Foundry was modelled as a tweaked oil refinery or something like that, and so it's just recoloured or something like that. But that building doesn't really look like either of those to me. But could easily be wrong on that. So we've got all sorts of weird, are they asteroids, are they what have you? But a lot of the chests are full of this pink apple, pink tomato type fruit. That appears to be coming in here and is being loaded into the rocket. It's interesting it's got an output on it as well, and that output seems to be the weirdly shaped thing. That's interesting, because you would think anything coming down would be coming down via these. Otherwise, what's the point of these? So if that's some kind of extra output from them, then what could that mean? Maybe that was the early spoilage, and maybe it is spoilage. Maybe that was a placeholder graphic for spoilage, perhaps. Because these do have, what I was going to say, is they do have the white line on them. As it happens, they all look to be full things. But they did mention that spoilage went in very early, and these all have the spoilage line on them. One of my commenters, apologies, I can't remember the name, suggested that a vertical line for the spoilage would actually be a lot easier to understand and see, because, I mean, look at that. That's just a continuous line of white. So what's that telling me? But if it was on the side, you'd at least be able to see the individual ones. Of course, when it then was vertical on the belt, you maybe lose that. So I don't know, but you can't see the overlapping ones anyway, whereas you would see the overlapping side ones. So I think that was a really great suggestion. And yeah, so they're putting that stuff into a rocket. Now, are they sending that out there for some other reason? Are they making something else with this fruit on another planet? But there doesn't seem to be a lot of reason for sending the fruit that we know of, because it's really science packs that you would want to export. Yeah, this is very weird how this is set up, because it's putting it into a chest, putting it into a rocket, and then it's got actually several outputs, and some of which are circuit controlled. So I say I'm wondering if this is like a spoilage control for the fruit, and that it's putting them into the active providers so that it will push it into the logistics system for the the spoilt fruit. Maybe could be. The main sort of visual interesting thing are all the plants, basically. So I have to assume that they're all plants, but some of them do look like they could be, that could be some sort of weird worm or something. But a lot of them, you've got this green one that looks almost sort of crystalline. You've got these ones with the sort of bulb heads on them. What else have we got? We've got whatever that is, sort of some, I don't know, something with almost legs on it. So that worm one. There was a purple one. Oops. Some sort of purple one here, and this one. I mean, that looks actually a lot like one that's in the in the graphics on the thing. With the holes in it that triggers my trypophobia. So yeah, we've got all sorts of different plants here. The implication is that perhaps all of these were harvestable and all gave different fruits essentially, that you could process. What is also very apparent here is this additional building. Now what this actually appears to be doing is taking in some sort of sludge. That pipe is an input pipe, okay? Some sort of grey, browny sludge, and outputting wood, okay? So this is possibly the early prototype for the bioreactor, maybe? The biochamber that, is taking in biological products and outputting other things that you might want to use. The only sort of counter to that, in a sense, or maybe it isn't and maybe it's a building that's gone type point, is that obviously we've not seen the biochamber have fluid handling on it. It doesn't appear to have a place where a pipe could go in, but then an assembler doesn't either. An assembler doesn't have a default pipe until you switch it to a fluid recipe. So it could be that the biochamber does have that functionality in some way and that it evolved from this building. This doesn't really look anything like that biochamber, but then why would it? It's a placeholder. But it is interesting that a mechanic seemed to be taking sludge of some description and turning it into wood. What would you use wood for? We do also have another couple of these buildings, which is why I'm thinking it's maybe that it's the proto biochamber. But there's a couple of them here on the side, and I'm not entirely sure exactly what this is doing. One thing it could be doing is it's maybe representing the planting, but it looks like it's outputting lube, basically. So this looks like the green of a lube, and it looks like a couple are connected together and sending the pipe fluid through. It does have the symbol that looks like this plant. So could it be that there was... but it also seems to be taking in the sludge. So I don't know, maybe there was some mechanic where this harvested the local plants, like the harvester does, turned them into whatever product, the one product you could make out of them, but also maybe replanted it. Or maybe they just regrew naturally, and so this is how you would get lube, this is how you would get wood. Why you'd want wood, I don't know, but this is how you would get wood, and you make it out of... Because that plant doesn't look like that one, is sort of my question on it. That plant doesn't appear to be on here. So, I'm a bit confused on how that's exactly... if they're doing the same thing of feeding the local area, then it didn't quite make sense. But yeah, it looks like they had some quite significantly different mechanics and more mechanics and kind of reined it back in. There is some kind of crystal here that is sulphur but not sulphur. It's clearly sulphur that's been recoloured as some kind of, placeholder, I would guess. Because they mentioned in the Friday Facts that there were 12 harvestable, fruits, bioproducts basically, and that's gone right the way down to 2. So presumably some of these, like this sort of orange crystal, I don't even know what that is, but some of these that look like they're blobs around other blobs are perhaps intermediates that used to be in the game, but they've removed quite a lot of that stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if we had like 12 things, and rather than culling 10, they actually squished in. So maybe they took 6 of the designs and squished them into 2, and so that those 2 have all of those components from those 6, whereas they were individual components before. So maybe you had one plant that could make this sludge that you then turned into wood, and that's all the fruit did. And whereas now they got the biochamber, and that can take that fruit and make nutrients, plastic, it can make all sorts of stuff out of that one product. And perhaps these globally ones, those are the ones you turned into plastic, whereas now it's just the one plant that can be made into all sorts of things, and that's how they simplified it. Because 12 does sound horrendous. That's into bobs and angels and all that sort of territory. So yeah, I'm not saying any of that with the expectation that any of these mechanics or ideas have been pulled through into the game. I don't know that this really represents anything other than, as was presented, that it was way more complicated with more plants, that they had this different approach to bringing stuff down from orbit, that spoilage has been in the game for absolutely ages, and that this thing, whatever it is, used to be the representation of spoilage. I'd have to look at the graphics. Maybe it's the same one. But yeah, to me that looks like a different thing to the spoilage icon. Interesting. It also slightly, I'll be honest, it slightly reassures me a bit, because I've been a bit concerned, if I'm honest, that we're getting these super duper amazing new machines. Manufacturing them is limited to the planet that they're on, and every single one that you need to use somewhere else, or you want to use somewhere else, you've got to stick on a rocket and stick on a space platform and take there. And we know that there's a weight limit for items that you can put into space. So it implies that every single one of these foundries, assuming this isn't, this doesn't look like Vulcanus, but every single one of these foundries and every single one of these big mining drills has required a rocket to be taken into space. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. So that's 32 rockets just to get that stuff there. And obviously you've got the calcite itself, which you're moving about. So there's a lot of rocketry-based logistics, that you're going to have to do. But clearly, if this is, they're doing it and it works and it's viable, that rockets are sufficiently cheap. And I guess that's one of the balancing things they'll have to sort out. But rockets are sufficiently cheap and easy to do, and space platforms easy enough to build, that this is a viable strategy for building things. Because there's not a single beacon on this. Obviously, they've probably got prod modules in them and what have you, but there's not a single beacon here. So this isn't a setup that only works because it's, beaconed. I don't think I have a lot more to say on this one. It is interesting that molten metals seem to be a really good way of doing stuff. That I don't know, I say, because I was worried about how difficult it was to send rockets about, I hadn't really ever thought that maybe exporting calcite and sending foundries and EMPs all over the shop was really the way to go. But it looks like it probably is. And my guess is because the foundry, the big mining drill, the EMP are so powerful with their prod bonuses and number of beacons you can get on them, and the packing density, how much you can get out of a single volume of fluid, is just so high that really is the solution for really big production. But say, it hadn't really twigged with me then. As I was speculating yesterday, I suspect that there is a new building that is the super manufactory that is essentially able to take advantage of all this production, because at the moment you're pretty much going to have to, it depends on what you're making obviously, but if you're thumping out 85 blue belts worth of green circuits, how are you consuming those with anything other than like 1,000 manufactories, which just seems counter to where they've been pushing these machines. They've been pushing everything towards a fewer number of machines produce even more, and you get even more free stuff from productivity. We then seem to hit a point where that stops, and suddenly you've got to go back to the old systems. You've got quality, but then you've got quality on both ends. So it feels like there's a building missing, and that perhaps there's going to be a super manufacturer, something like that basically allows you to take all of these intermediate products and turn them into end products, as it were, much more easily and with productivity bonus, because you don't have any prod bonus at all on any of the end. You can't get a bonus roboport basically. So maybe it doesn't have a prod bonus, but it gets a massive speed boost, and that allows you to make endpoint materials more fast. But actually I think it's more focused on the initial science packs, the red, the green, the blue, the military, the purple, the yellow science packs, and that's how you get even more volume of them. And perhaps you end up with the same bottleneck you've always had of space science, and getting that because it's more complicated. But also, as I say, it feels like maybe that's the end game. That's the building on Aquila that we've had no hint of. It's this super manufactory, and it could use, feeding into the ideas of Aquila being cold. It could be that it has to have a super, when we're getting superconductive fluid, with a mention of Tesla things, that it's some sort of mad science machine that uses superconductivity in order to boost its productivity, and that there's then a challenge around, you know, sort of using that machine anywhere other than that building. But yeah, it's just the way it was phrased, you know, there's a building that works well with these. Well, it can't, that's a weird way of phrasing things, as I often point out, if it's just the Gleba bioreactor. You know, if it's just the biochamber, why not just say it's the biochamber? It's got to be something else. You know, it could be this guy, but that doesn't look like any kind of, you know, manufacturing. What it could be, I guess, thinking about it, if it is a fluid handling machine and it works really well, the foundry, could it maybe give you even more fluid for the fluid that you put in? So you can push in molten metal into it and it spits out even more. It's like a prod bonus machine. You know, you could imagine it, just to give it something to a mechanic to work off, it sort of aerates the stuff, or basically takes 1,000 molten metal and turns it into 1,200 molten metal, and therefore gives you even more out of your fluid. That could be something. It could also be something that attaches to another building. This is one of the things I mentioned as a possible concept, is that it's more like a modular thing where you can basically stick it on the top of an assembly machine, and when you combine them together, it becomes the super assembler. So, I don't know. Certainly it handles fluids, and if Aquila is a thing and it's about cold and fluids, it could well be that it's based there. But yeah, basically, you know, we still don't know what that building's about, and we still don't know, and we've had a hint at another building. We know it's pretty much been 2 new buildings per planet. So could it be both of these, that and the new one, are on Aquila, and they help with production everywhere else? I don't have anything else to say about the rail setup other than repeating again, this is what I want for the rail. This is my Clapham Junction opportunity, where it's just a mad network of trains. Train spaghetti taken to the nth degree. Obviously this is a proper junction, but I want to be able to overlap rail things, and, you know, just go mad with rail everywhere else, like belts, basically. One of the things I did save is that we do have a couple of extra things on here. The first isn't anything new, I don't think. I think it's the exact same equivalent of this first one. You know, where this is iron, I think this is copper. You know, it's the exact same design used for copper, and that's all, basically. I don't think there's anything else going on there as such. But what we do have down the bottom here is a bunch of labs. So these are labs that are taking in various science packs, science bottles, and, you know, via belts and all sorts of stuff like that. It's obviously very zoomed in now, so it's a bit difficult to see. But I think we are seeing the extra science pack, okay? Because we've got, if you look at this one I think is one of the best ones. So we've got the red science pack, we've got the green science pack, the normal green science pack, we've got a military science pack, we've got the blue science pack, we've then got purple science pack, and we've got gold science pack. So those are the Nauvis default science packs that we know, or we believe, are all still made on Nauvis. We've then got the white science pack, so the space science pack, which of course now you've got we haven't got to, you can just launch rockets normally, but, you know, it's best made on space platforms. We've then got the orange one, which is the Vulcanus one, the, what's it called? Metallic? No? Whatever it's called, the orange one from Vulcanus. We've then got the light green one from Gleba, and we got the pink one from Fulgora, okay? We've then got a dark blue one, okay? We don't know what a dark blue science pack is or where that would have come from. Unfortunately, it seems to be hidden. I think it's on this bottom belt here. I think. But it seems to be kind of hidden. I'm pretty sure it's also on this belt here, but it's very difficult to see that one for me. But I think the dark blue science pack is on that vertical belt there, and that sort of, you know, horizontal belt on the bottom there, and that's how that's coming in. But as I say, there does appear to be, to me, a sort of dark blue science pack, and it is, consistently on almost all of these machines, I think. Okay, so I think that's our first reveal of either the Aquila science pack as a separate thing, or possibly the end game science pack. That this is very end game. They've got to all the planets, they've got all of the science packs, and so this is our first hint of a dark blue one. Dark blue is interesting if, in a thematic sense. If you say molten metals are orange, you say plants are green, I don't know where you'd get pink from. Supercapacitors are pink. Dark blue then, could that be water? Could that be ice? Could that be cold, frosty water? That's way off into speculation there. But yeah, I certainly think that is our first view of the either Aquila science pack or the end game science pack. Okay, so slight addendum to this. I realised in the edit that you can't quite see what I'm looking at because it's too small. I was afraid of what I'm showing on screen here, which is that it gets too blurry, too pixely to see what's going on, but I thought maybe I would zoom in to give you a better view. The dark blue science pack is this one next to the pink one in both of these two labs here, and also the two below them. When I was setting this up, I realised that there's something else next to the dark blue one in the left-hand labs compared to the right-hand labs. It doesn't shape-wise entirely look like a science pack, but it could be that it's so dark it's perhaps properly black, where the military science pack is grey. And so maybe we've got all of the science packs in these labs, not just the exclusive Aquila one. We've got both the Aquila one and the Endgame one. Another option is the spoilage, that's where it shows the spoilage. I don't think it's the spoilage because we're not actually seeing any spoilage on any of the belts. The other hint that this is a science pack is actually on the belts. Now that we zoom right in, we can see on this far left belt here that there is a dark blue and a possibly black, possibly dark grey, something like that, science pack on this belt, I think. Because we've got pink, we've got the light green, we've got white, we've got yellow. Across the bottom here, we've got certainly blue and red and green and those sorts of things. So I think maybe we've got on the far left here the science pack on the belt for both of them, and it's in this lab, but they're not in this lab. If you look at the belts, this one on the sort of middle portion here doesn't look like it's got science packs on the belt. It looks like the belt's empty, and it doesn't have that something in the bottom right, whereas on the left one it looks like it does have something on the belt and it does have something in the labs. So I think on further analysis, having zoomed this in, this is all of the science packs. They also, just to note, they do have output for spoilage. So this is clearly, as the game works, as we're seeing it, this extra filter that's on here is the spoilage. So that's how they're getting rid of the spoiled light green science packs. We can actually see the spoilage symbol, I think, in some places here. And I think that is on the green one. It could obviously be on something else, the light green one. So I think that is, the spoilage mechanic, as I say, in action. Not a great deal to say other than, what I said yesterday on this, that this is an insane production of grenades, basically, for the only purpose we, know about for grenades is, the military science pack. So is this mega base scale military science pack production, or are grenades something that we can throw via machine, and that therefore automating grenades so that we have a grenade thrower could be something that they introduce for the military stuff. I'd love to see something like that. As I've said before, we have loads of military tech that is basically useless. And it's not just a case of eventually the way to go is flamers or lasers or what have you. It's just that combat robots and all of those things they're really only there if you want to play with them. They're not a kind of optimal solution. They have only limited kind of real use cases. I'm sure lots of people love them and all that sort of stuff, but they're just they're an option, not a core thing. And it would be great to get grenades or capsules or something being used in some new endgame military stuff, just to give you more things that are viable to play with in a general playthrough. But yeah, I think this is really grenades for military production, and that this is a mega base scale type of stuff. Also, just to note, of course, that there's lots of pipe junctions and all sorts of stuff going on here because it's being fed via liquid iron. A lot of this would be a real nightmare for Fluids 1.0. I'm pretty sure this machine is being starved, and that's why it's not got any grenades on the thing. But even without that point, a lot of these would get starved of fluids, and you'd be like, but I'm pumping it in and it's not coming through. And version 2.0 of this, just, all of this is one pipe network because there's no pumps in any of it. They're all connected to machines, but they're all connected together. So this is effectively one giant reservoir of molten metal that they're all pulling from, So much simpler, so much easier to implement. And all right, it's teleporting fluids that's not realistic, but who cares? I can't see that in a pipe, All I see is a set of pipes connected together and some animation on the occasional pipe showing flow. In my opinion, and I don't want to reignite that debate because I got really rather bored of it, but to me, all right, it's not realistic. The old system wasn't realistic. I don't care about the simplification they've done, other than it makes it so much easier to implement. And that's what I want from Fluids. I don't want workarounds for a system that's just daft. I want something that just works. Next one then, so again, I think I pretty much said everything I wanted to say on this yesterday. It is interesting to see lasers there, confirming that there is military and that does use the regular Pumpjack and that it's worth putting speed modules on and etc. Yeah, I can't think of anything else to say on this one. Yeah, and just to finish this one off then, we have this super duper rocket launching area. I don't think this shows anything particularly interesting or particularly new. It is quite a lot of legendary beacons with legendary speed modules, in legendary productivity modules in the silos, and obviously that's part of what I was saying yesterday. Was that I'd been a bit worried that because the whole space logistics is uses rockets, that even if they chop the recipes down, it's still going to be quite difficult to get really big volume moving about because of how limited the amount of weight is that you can put on a single rocket. But clearly, if you go super beacon heavy, super quality heavy, and make sure you got a few beacons on and stuff like that, it is clearly viable to send, as I say, there were like over 60 rockets worth of stack inserters into space and have those moving around so that you can make quality stack inserters. One of the things that is interesting about that is that that's the approach they've taken, that they've used. So this factory, I don't know, I would guess it's on Nauvis because of the terrain, but you could almost imagine this being on, Fulgora or something because, that's where circuits are super cheap and that you would then make the actual inserters on Fulgora. But I suspect it's probably the other way round, that it's just easier to make oodles of bulk inserters on Nauvis and send them to Fulgora where you've got all of your recycling and stuff set up, and so it's just easier to send the stuff there that you want to turn into quality, maybe? I don't know. I hope you enjoyed this bonus video and you might consider coming back for another one. If you'd like to chat about the latest Factorio Friday Facts, you can find me live streaming Factorio every weekend over on my Twitch channel at Trismegistus. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Cool.